So let's have a look this week, Guy, at what's been going on with regard to the US and strategic affairs. I don't know whether you heard about the US strategic review, the national security
Yeah,
review,
yeah.
which Trump took delivery of this week. Some quite dramatic stuff in there. Just to run through a few bits and pieces, he's very critical of Europe. It's been all over the press.
Mm.
You'll have seen that. He said that on their current trajectory, we'll face civilizational erasure in Europe. Now, I mean, Britain's included in this. There's quite some significant criticism for Sadiq Khan, who he doesn't seem to like at all. He's called him a dreadful mayor, a vicious person, and what have you. And how much he loves London in an interview that he's done.
Yeah, that's a
with the press.
long-standing feud, isn't it? It goes back to his first term, didn't he? When he started, I think, having something to say about knife crime in London.
Yeah.
And I think Khan went back with, as you would, statistics about gun crime, and off it went, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it suggested he wasn't very keen. Do you remember Khan sanctioned that blimp of him as a baby that was floating around over London when he made his first state visit? Do you remember that?
I had forgotten that, but that probably didn't help.
That didn't go down too well, not surprisingly. So he's gone on to talk about transnational bodies, talking about how he feels that the European Union undermines political liberty and national sovereignty. He's got this thing about national sovereignty, hasn't he? He and Elon Musk are very keen on this idea of free speech when it suits them.
When it suits, yeah.
But not when it...
And sovereignty when it isn't Russia trying to invade a sovereign nation.
Yeah, double standards, just a little bit. Yeah. It's and he's gone on to say they don't know whether European nations can remain reliable allies with concerns over cratering birth rates and loss of national identities. This is all to do with immigration. I think this is all to do with the argument that we're not... Bluntly, we're not reproducing enough homegrown, as he sees it, nationalities in Europe, that we're bringing people in from outside to boost our population, which I don't know, what the Italians did this a while back, didn't they? They tried to encourage people to have more than one child. They were giving them an extra couple of €100 or something, or it's a couple of €1,000 if they had a few extra children. But this all seems to be a bit like the sort of racist nationalism that seems to be prevalent in the States quite a lot just as of late. Quite worrying. So we know where he stands, and one of the things in this document is about Ukraine, and that they want to settle the war without any further intervention from the Americans, effectively, which we know about. And he's also critical of European leaders for holding unrealistic expectations in respect of Ukraine. Well, what's happened in this last week, there seems to be a week seems to encompass events that used to be over a year recently. I mean, we've had all these meetings.
What you know about Trump on any policy matter is that they say, don't they, that his view can change according to the last person he had any lengthy conversation with. And it wasn't so long ago, a couple of months, that he was saying it was entirely feasible that Ukraine could take all their land back along with Crimea. And now it's flipped the other way. I wouldn't say you take this with a pinch of salt, because I think in some ways he is right. And as with any argument, there's often an element of truth. So let's start with some things that we would probably agree with, that all of us in Europe have neglected our defence, and we've ridden on the coattails of the US for NATO for many, many, many years, and had unrealistic expectations of the so-called peace dividend. And it would only have ever taken one crazed individual to come along somewhere, and it's happened. That's a thing. So he's right, although he didn't actually say that, but he's right there. We haven't, as a continent, controlled our borders. We've found it impossible to control our borders. And almost every European nation has struggled with controlling, certainly, let's call it illegal immigration, with some policies saying, oh, these have been very successful. But only the other day, the much heralded Denmark, I heard, their government is a bit of crisis. So, it's not perfect. So there's a couple of truths there. Let's forget the personal stuff, because that's just weird. But the bigger concern, I think, is what's really going on. Are we talking about just another nail in the coffin of NATO support, do you think? Is that,
Well,
is that getting ever closer?
I think so. And I think what worries me, I mean, you were talking about, and I think we all agree, and he's brought that to a head, that European countries ought to have been spending more on their own defence. And
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. I think the problem, not the problem, but the issue has been for the last 80 years, to all intents and purposes. I think after the Second World War, most European countries didn't have any money to be able to spend on defence. I think that, I mean, in this country, look at the Attlee government after the Second World War. We spent all this money on the welfare state, effectively, or borrowed all this money to spend on the welfare state. So I think European countries got entrenched in this NATO belief that the Americans would always be there as a, this famous word, backstop. And I think that's run through and run through and run through. And that has been true to a degree, because you and I both grew up in the Cold War. And when I think of some of the things that are happening now, I think, the drones flying over Poland and over NATO airspace, I think they would have been the cause for huge, huge worry on both sides of the Iron Curtain in the 70s and 80s, if that sort of thing had been happening then. And yet it seems to be an everyday occurrence now. And I think part of that problem is that the Russians, Putin, doesn't believe the NATO threat anymore, and has every reason to, because at every turn, Trump seems to be undermining the NATO alliance. And I think there's a speech that Rutte's made today, Mark Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO, about why we should be, in Europe, why we should be preparing to engage in a war against Russia by 2030 would be of the same nature as that which our grandparents took part in.
And is this fact-based, or is he just drumming up business for NATO, as is his prime purpose?
There's always going to be an element of drumming up business for NATO, isn't there? There's always going to. I mean, it's like when our defence minister says, we need to have this, but there's a truth in it as well, which I think is quite frightening. But that seems to completely diverge from what this policy document in the States says. It's downgrading the threat from Russia, for example. In the last one that Trump did in his last administration, Russia was seen as an acute threat, but there's no question of it being a threat in this latest document. So pulling apart and pulling apart and pulling apart, where does it get to the point where they say, well, we're not really interested in... I mean, if NATO were called upon now to defend Poland, would we see the Americans back up NATO in defence of Poland? Or the Baltic states, for example. Maybe the Baltic states is a better example, in that they're not that long ago were under Moscow's control. And I think that's the way... There's talk... I'm diverging a little bit. There's talk of a group called the C5 connected to this document. The C5 is a group of nations that Trump sees, or the administration sees, as controlling the world, effectively.
Controlling the world. Okay, so who's in it?
Who's in it? Who would you think?
Okay, I'm going to go for, because it's Trump, I'm going to go China, America, Russia.
Yeah.
And then you could go, it's not a state, but you could go EU.
No, the EU is not in it. No, the EU is...
okay, no, so we're not going to control the world?
No.
Then you're going to Asia, going for large populations, India?
India, yep. Tick.
Okay, one to go, struggling, because it could be any one of...
Well, this is quite surprising, but I guess if you're looking at the world as a whole...
Yep.
Who would you consider to be one of the Americans' greatest allies in the Asia Pacific region traditionally? Well, for the last 80 years anyway, there wasn't so much of an ally.
No, because when you said ally, I thought about a particular place, and then I thought, well, no, but Japan then. Japan,
yeah. I mean, that's the unusual choice in this C5. But the idea is that this, because Trump has his statement. I mean, they've denied it, actually. Interestingly, the administration have denied that this is in place. But the media organisations seem to think there's been a lot of discussion going on with these 5 nations in terms of how at the opera. I'm surprised actually that Japan is involved in this. I could see the other four. It's very
Russia militarily,
yeah,
India populist, China because it's China, and America because it's America.
yeah.
I just it's not really related, but I just got visions of all these mandarins absolutely arms up in horror saying, "Oh my God, we're not in it. What about the coalition of the willing?"
Well, okay, yes. But the whole thing, I mean, I think we'll have to watch and see what materializes out of this, the Ukrainian settlement, which is coming to a head. But the whole thing seems quite worrying in its complete upturning of world order.